Welcome and thank you all for standing by. At this time, all participants will be in a listen-only mode until the question and answer session at the end of today's conference. Today's conference is being recorded. If you have any objections, you may disconnect at this time. I would now like to turn the call over to Ms. Andrea DeSalva. You may begin.
Good evening, everyone, and good morning to those of you joining us early in China, Hong Kong, and parts of Europe. Welcome to our webinar titled Doing Business in China and Hong Kong Filmart. My name is Andrea DeSalva, and I'm a Senior Policy Analyst for the media and entertainment industry in the International Trade Administration at the U.S. Department of Commerce in Washington, D.C. Before introducing our panel of seasoned experts, I need to cover a few housekeeping items. Should you experience any difficulties logging on to the webinar, you can press *0 now on your phone, and you'll be transferred to an operator who can help. This feature is available both for callers in the U.S. and abroad. You can also call straight into the conference registration, 800-475-5000, and ask for technical assistance. At the end of the webinar, we offer a question and answer session, and the phone lines will be open. The operators will come on to instruct you once the presentations conclude. You'll be on mute, like Ivy just told you, and you'll not be able to address us until the end of the webinar. We welcome your input, so please stay on. We'll also email you a link to the presentation online in 1 or 2 business days if you've registered with me, and the webinar will be posted then at stopfakes.gov. I'd like you to visit the site if you haven't been on it before. StopFakes is a one-stop portal for information on what the U.S. government is doing to protect the creative content sectors against piracy and to enforce intellectual IPR laws. The website is managed by the Commerce Department in collaboration with multiple agencies. Of interest to you is a tutorial for SMEs, small and medium enterprises, and there are also toolkits for individual countries. I'd also like to take this opportunity to mention IFTA's comprehensive guide to copyright protection, which is available to members. And you can contact Shahrukh for a copy. His email will be up on the screen a little bit later on in the presentation. And now on to the program. The Independent Film and Television Alliance received a Market Development Cooperator Award in 2010, which I co-managed with Shahrukh Sheikh. With the joint funding, we've supported American Filmart and last year the first ever American Pavilion at Hong Kong Filmart, aiming to increase exports for your sector, for independent producers and distributors. And next month, members of IFTA will again participate at the Hong Kong Trade Show, and we hope today's webinar can serve as a bit of a primer both to the show as well as to answering questions you may have about exporting to Hong Kong and China and protecting your intellectual property, which we know remains a significant hurdle, especially for small businesses, sometimes with limited resources. Today's webinar is also very timely due to the significant opening of the Chinese film market, which was announced last week. Working with the indie sector is truly a pleasure. You're creative and dynamic. You represent a fantastic industry that converges with art, technology, and intellectual property. Your industry is comprised mostly of small businesses, and you represent what is uniquely American abroad. Your work is in high demand globally, and you also collaborate with foreign counterparts in so many ways to support and promote the overall business. Here in the International Trade Administration, we work steadfastly to open markets for U.S. exports, and we hope this webinar will serve to increase your tool set to be better equipped to export. If you'd like to hear about other topics in the future, please send your ideas to me. Now back to the speakers and what you're actually here for. I might note that you'll find the speakers' biographies on the second page of the agenda, which was mailed to you this afternoon, and I just sent around an updated version about half an hour back. Leading off the webinar will be Jean Pruitt, President and CEO of IFTA, IFTA, and Susan Clary, Vice President and General Counsel, both at the Independent Film and Television Alliance. Maura Kawai will then provide a brief overview of the services provided to you by our sister office in Los Angeles, after which we launch into the keynote. Julia Charlton is the founder and principal partner of Charlton's. She resides in Hong Kong but is giving the presentation from Shanghai this morning, and she will share her expertise as a corporate lawyer on the Chinese and Hong Kong markets for the film industry and the legalities of working with the state-controlled sector or launching from Hong Kong as the gateway to China. Then we have two presentations on the IP regimes of China and Hong Kong by lawyers He Jing, who is a senior consultant with Zai Partners in Beijing, and Esther Wai-Ling Ho, a partner at Wilkinson & Grist in Hong Kong. Fanny Chow is also in Hong Kong, and she will tell you about the Filmart and what our offices do in capitals around the world, but especially on the point of Hong Kong Filmart and exports. Finally, Jonathan Wolf, IFTA's Executive Vice President and Managing Director of the American Filmart, along with Shahrukh Sheikh, will tie it all together in their closing remarks and also share information about upcoming events. While introducing the final speaker, I also have to thank Janice Wingo, who is a Senior Legal Advisor in our Office of China and who will moderate the question and answer session. Janice has lived and worked in China, is a Mandarin speaker, and was most instrumental in getting this event off the ground. I now turn the microphone over to Jean Pruitt, who will give you a quick overview of the U.S.-China Film Agreement. Jean?
Yes, thank you very much, Andrea. I'll open this, and then Susan can pitch in with some details. As most of you will have read in the press, Friday night and over the weekend, after close to 7 years of effort, starting with a complaint filed at the World Trade Organization, the U.S. and China on Friday night reached agreement on the terms under which the complaints related to the lack of access for U.S. and other non-Chinese films to the Chinese theatrical market would be resolved. We're incredibly pleased with the agreement, which from the standpoint of independence represents the first time that our business needs have been taken account of in any directly in any similar form of trade negotiation and trade agreement. The terms of the agreement are still being finalized for documentation, and when that's done, of course, we'll share the actual written commitments with the membership as we go forward. But briefly, what was agreed Friday night was a set of changes related to both the market for revenue sharing films and the market for films that are non-revenue sharing. For revenue sharing films, the quota that was agreed 12 years ago as part of China's accession to the WTO of 20 foreign films could be imported for and receive compensation based on a share of box office revenue. The quota itself stays as is, but what was added was an additional 14 slots for films in enhanced format. Today that means 3D and IMAX. Going forward it may mean other things. The agreement was that this was sort of broad-based in terms of new technologies. Also was agreed that the revenue share on the films generally will go from an estimated 13 to 17.5%, which is what is applied up till now, to 25% of box office, with China bearing the cost of most of the taxes and distribution costs. On the non-revenue sharing side, actually what I think was achieved was even more fundamental change in the scope of the marketplace. China has affirmed that they do not, as a matter of law, and will not going forward as a matter of practice, restrict national distribution to only China Film Group, that they will encourage other privately owned Chinese entities to go into the marketplace as national theatrical distributors, which introduces a substantial competitive force, potentially introduces a substantial competitive force to that piece of the marketplace. The other piece of the negotiation focused on the terms under which, quote, non-revenue share films go into China. And historically, the amount of money that has been offered by China Film Group has been very restricted for those films. While there's been some movement in the last couple of years to enable companies to receive a higher amount of money that begins to look more like our standard minimum guarantee from other markets, that really has not grown in the way it should. part of the negotiation involved sharing figures which show that China is now comparable to France and Germany in terms of the number of screens, total box office, number of films that are released, and as a consequence, we are now looking at competitive terms in China on the non-revenue share side that China has agreed will be modeled after these comparable marketplaces. That will also include some changes in the censorship process to make it much more transparent, both in terms of requiring that reasons be given if a film fails censorship, and that the producer or intermediary who's done the deal is allowed to consider cuts to meet the censorship objections, or if it's some form of a package deal, to substitute titles to ensure that the deal itself can go forward. You know, as we get the full documentation, there'll be more detail on how censorship and similar processes will work. But from our standpoint, I think we look at this as really giving us the foundation to pursue very competitive opportunities in China. And the introduction of competition really is the basis on which the marketplace will be pushed wide open by the Chinese industry itself. That this is not the U.S. coming in and throwing bombs. This is very much China becoming aware that they are now an incredibly strong market, and not just in terms of population, but in terms of the amount that's actually being earned there, and allowing a substantial number more players to compete with China Film Group, to work side by side, and to ensure that films are distributed nationally on the basis they are in the other major markets of the world. Susan, do you have anything to add?
Well, let's talk about implementations. Jean covered everything, and we don't want to get into too many details as the agreement is not yet signed, although it has been concluded. The agreement's effective when it is signed, and that's expected very soon in Geneva. Once the agreement's signed, the U.S. government, obviously, USTR, will be an important part of the monitoring of implementation, and to make sure that, you know, what we've agreed to and what the Chinese has committed to is actually playing out in the marketplace. And then after 5 years, the agreement will be reviewed for its whether or not it needs to be revised to reflect, you know, the new marketplace realities that would be in China after, hopefully, the successful implementation and some results coming from this agreement in both terms of market access and copyright protection, which we pursued last year.
In a separate negotiation.
So I think that's all we really can say about it at this point, but we are very happy that it's concluded successfully and that the independents were vigorously represented, and our needs and concerns have been addressed.
Thank you, both Jean and Susan. This is very exciting news, and we're eager to see the agreement signed. Maura?
Hi, thank you, Andrea. I'm Maura Kawai of the Commercial Service, Los Angeles.
Maura?
Hi, next slide, please. Our office works directly with local film and entertainment companies like yours to target opportunities to resourcefully sell your films and services abroad. We cooperate with Jonathan Wolf of IFTA to increase the participation of global buyers at American Film Market in Santa Monica. Next slide, please. We team with our overseas offices to help you find new buyers in new markets. Hong Kong has a closer economic partnership arrangement with China. Working through Hong Kong offers several advantages for entering the Chinese market. Since 2004, our office has teamed with Commercial Service Hong Kong to provide meeting opportunities for you with Hong Kong industry, particularly in animation and special effects. That's the reason we want you to know the benefits of participating in the U.S. Pavilion at Hong Kong Filmart. Exhibits are from the worlds of film, TV, animation, digital entertainment, and post-production. By exhibiting, you'll have access to 5,000 trade visitors from 50 countries and regions. The U.S. Pavilion is designed by the show organizer, IFTA, and Commercial Service Hong Kong to help you enter the Hong Kong and Chinese markets. IFTA and Commercial Service Hong Kong are organizing the second annual U.S. Pavilion at Hong Kong this March. Fanny Chow from Commercial Service Hong Kong delivers in-depth matchmaking for you with buyers from Hong Kong, China, and at least 6 other Asian markets. We aim to help you make the most of your participation, and therefore we support Fanny's meeting arrangements on your behalf and work closely with the show organizer, Hong Kong Trade Development Council's Julia Sun and Teresa Hung. I will allow you to finish my last 2 slides yourselves. They are self-explanatory, I hope. And I now turn the program over to our keynote speaker, Julia Charlton. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Well, hello, everybody. I'm going to take a step back in time, first of all, and talk about the Hong Kong film industry. The Hong Kong film industry was once, and perhaps still is to some extent, a dominant industry in the world. It has one of the largest and most dynamic film entertainment industries. In terms of per capita production, Hong Kong ranked first in Asia in terms of filmmaking. During its peak, the Hong Kong film industry produced nearly 200 films a year and generated revenue from the domestic market, but more significantly from overseas markets. Hong Kong films still enjoy huge popularity in Thailand, Singapore, Malaysia, Indonesia, and South Korea. And in the early 1990s, the once robust Taiwanese film industry came close to extinction under the onslaught of Hong Kong imports. During the same period, Hong Kong was one of the few markets which managed to grow despite the intrusion of Hollywood movies. Hong Kong has often been chosen as a regional base in Asia by foreign film production companies to tap the Chinese and Asian markets. Legendary East, for example, has been set up in Hong Kong by Legendary Pictures. Hong Kong is among the world's largest exporter of films. In 2010, 54 locally produced films were released on screen, generating around $37 million worth of film exports. And in recent years, mainland China has become a vital market for Hong Kong films. There's a wealth of film talent and professionals who've managed to gain recognition in the international film industry. John Woo, Chow Yun-fat, Jackie Chan are just some of the successful names who've managed to straddle the Eastern and Western film markets. The Oscar-winning movie, The Departed, directed by Martin Scorsese, was based on the story of Internal Affairs, a highly successful Hong Kong film. So this is just another example of one of the contributions that the Hong Kong film industry has made to international film. Hong Kong is also a popular place for overseas crews who are shooting commercial films. And in recent years, films which have used Hong Kong as their filming locations have included Transformers, Dark of the Moon, The Dark Knight, Saving My Wife, a Korean film, Red Knights from France, and Hong Kong Confidential, and Blood Money. Turning now to the China film industry. Since its first motion picture, The Battle of Dingjunshan, made in 1905, the Chinese film industry has enjoyed a history of over 100 years. Over the past century, Chinese film has evolved into a complete industry, from production, theatrical distribution and exhibition to technological development and teaching and research. Along with the opening up and competitive landscape, the Chinese film industry has a higher profile in the international arena, and mega hits like Hero, House of Flying Daggers, and so on have achieved extraordinary box office success. China film festivals are held each year, and Chinese films participate in many international film festivals, which shows there is a continuing commitment on China's part to a level of international cooperation and exchange, which is also illustrated in the very exciting breakthroughs in terms of regulatory developments, which we just heard about. Against the background of China's general reform and modernization and its extensive implementation of industrialization, Chinese cinema is of course expected to be a growth area. And here's a slide about box office revenue in China. Despite the quantity of films produced in China, many of them are of relatively low quality by international standards and have weak appeal even in their own domestic market. Many production studios in China are primarily concerned with the production quota imposed by their regulator and have little interest in marketing films to their audience. This leaves room for the penetration of foreign films to fulfill the gap in the domestic market. And despite the yearly quota of what's currently 20 foreign films, we've just heard with an extra 14 in certain categories to be added, with myriad restrictions up to now, foreign films are well received in China, accounting for nearly half of all box office takings. China has become an increasingly important overseas market for the US and Hong Kong film industries. For example, China was the second highest earning market for Avatar, a movie that fails to make it past the censors and be included in the 20 automatically allowed to be shown in China, potentially loses out on the many billions of renminbi that China's audiences have to spend on film. The film industry in China is under strict control by the government, and the department responsible for overseeing the industry is the State Administration of Radio, Film and Television, SARFT. Let's talk for a moment about the state-controlled industry in terms of film and co-production. Up to now, and of course we've just heard about the recent developments, in general only about 20 foreign movies are allowed into the PRC on a revenue-sharing basis each year through authorized distributors, namely China Film Group Corporation and Huaxia Film Distribution Company. This has been called the quota system. Of course, this is subject to the recent development of the additional 14 enhanced format films, as mentioned by Jean Pruitt. And for a movie imported on a revenue-sharing basis, the foreign producer up to now has shared about 13% of box office. But as we've heard, that will be changed to around 25% when the new arrangements are implemented. China also imports foreign films on a flat rate basis each year, under which film owners will sell the China distribution right to authorized distributors at a flat rate. We call that the flat rate system. And foreign films under both the quota system and the flat rate system have to pass a censorship review. Despite import restrictions, China is fast becoming a major overseas market for Hollywood filmmakers. For instance, revenues from the PRC exceeded that for Japan and accounted for $204 million US of the $2.8 billion global box office revenue for Avatar. Among the top 10 foreign films by box office in 2010, all films were imported under the quota system, with the exception of The Expendables, which was imported under the flat rate system. We can see here the list of the 10 top local films in the PRC by box office, which you can see that quite a lot of these were under the co-production heading. Apart from imported movies, foreign producers may also co-produce with local producers in China. This co-production is not subject to the import quota if they qualify as co-production projects under the relevant regulations. These movies capture the creativity and expertise of both local and foreign producers. local production, including co-production movies, accounted for 55% of the 2010 total box office. Turning now to Sino-foreign co-production. A Sino-foreign co-production is a contractual arrangement between a foreign party and a Chinese party to conduct filming in China. There may be multiple parties on each side, provided that the lead Chinese party or parties must be a production entity or entities that have obtained the applicable film production licenses from SARFT. For the purposes of Sino-foreign co-production, investors or producers from Hong Kong and Macau and Taiwan are considered as overseas parties, and the economic split between distributor and producer for Sino-foreign co-production is on a negotiated basis, and generally this split gives foreign producers a larger share than movies imported under the quota system. Here's a table which shows the top 10 local films by box office and highlights those that are co-productions. We can see there the first, second, and third, and the majority of the others are in fact co-productions. Needless to say, this gives foreign producers much better competitive advantages and more ready access to the market than purely foreign-produced films. Turning now to the regulations for the film industry in China. Let's look at the procedures for approval of a co-production project. A Sino-foreign co-production film project can only formally commence on obtaining SARFT's approval, which is the form of issue of the permits for Chinese foreign co-production of film. And the process is set out on this slide. A foreign party would approach a Chinese partner, sign a letter of intent, and then a co-production agreement, file an application with the CFCC, who would conduct a preliminary review. SARFT approves the screenplay and issues a co-production permit. The co-producers sign a three-way agreement with CFCC and, if applicable, a formal co-production agreement, and then commence production. Once post-production is completed, the completed film must be submitted to SARFT for censorship review. Films that pass censorship review may be released within and or outside of China. However, if the completed film fails to pass censorship review, the film can't be released anywhere. As we heard earlier, there are going to be some modifications to this censorship process under the new developments. If the post-production and print development for a co-produced film needs to be conducted outside China, the parties have to apply in advance for approval of this. A joint production, if it passes censorship review, can participate in any overseas film festivals, provided that the plan to participate in any overseas film festival is reported to SARFT 20 days in advance for filing purposes. Regardless of the type of co-production, the key to structuring a Sino-foreign co-production is the participation of one or more qualified PRC production entities accredited by SARFT, of which there are a limited number. Looking now at methods of co-production, under the current regulatory regime, there are three modes of co-production, which are joint production, assisted production, and commissioned production. Joint production and assisted production are the most common methods of co-production. Joint production is where the Chinese and foreign parties jointly invest in and produce the film and share the copyright subsisting in the film and the risks and profits from the project. Joint production is by far the most popular method of co-production, and Chinese elements usually feature prominently in the film. In fact, it's a requirement that the Chinese cast constitute at least one-third of the main cast members. Joint productions are regarded as domestic films, as I've mentioned, and can be directly released in China after they're completed and have passed censorship review. Joint productions can also enter into the Huabiao Awards, the Chinese governmental awards, for the, quote, Best Co-Production Film Prize. The other method which I'll specifically describe is assisted production, which is where the foreign party provides the capital and the Chinese party provides assistance in regard to matters such as equipment, facilities, location, and labor in return for a fee. The product of an assisted production is owned by the foreign party, and the film cannot be released in China unless it's imported by an authorized import agent, such as the China Film Group Film Import and Export Corporation, which is a subsidiary of the China Film Group Corporation. Representative works of joint production include The Mummy, Tomb of the Dragon Emperor. Another example is Mission Impossible 3, which was also a co-production. Regulations on the film industry. Well, we're going to hear a lot more from experts on the IP situation, but a company's operations in the film industry are mainly regulated by the Film Administrative Regulations, which were effective on 1st of February 2002. The interim provisions on the qualifications for a film enterprise's access to commencement of operation, or the Film Enterprise Qualification Provisions, which were effective in November 2004, the provisions on the filing of film scripts, abstracts, and the administration of films, which were effective in June 2006. If a company ever engages in co-production with foreign co-producers, the regulations on the Sino-Foreign Cooperation in Film Production, or the Sino-Foreign Co-Production Regulations, effective in 2004, and other regulations derived from these are also applicable. Pursuant to all these regulations, production, distribution, exhibition, and import of films are subject to special licenses or permits issued by the SARFT or its local counterparts, and these include the Film Production License, or Film Production License Single Film as applicable for production of films in China, Co-Production Permit for joint production of films by Chinese and foreign entities, and the Film Distribution License for distribution of films, a Film Exhibition License for showing films, and a permit for film public screening for any film exhibited in, imported into, or exported out of China. The issue of the licenses and permits represents SARFT's approval of the content following its censorship review of the relevant film. Regulations on the film production and IP rights produced in China. Under the film regulations and the Film Enterprise Qualification Provisions, which I've just mentioned, production of films in China requires either a film production license or a film production license single film. These are granted on a film-by-film basis and need to be returned to SARFT when a permit for film's public screening is issued. A company won't be qualified for a film production license unless it's produced 2 or more films under single film production licenses. And a film production license is subject to inspection by SARFT every 2 years. In practice, SARFT issues film production licenses with an effective term of 2 years, and application for extension of the term has to be made before expiration. An approved film producer may produce films, make copies of, distribute within China, and export films produced by it subject to applicable law. In accordance with the PRC copyright law effective in 1991 and amended in 2010, film producers own the copyright to the films produced by them, while playwrights, directors, etc. enjoy the right of authorship and are entitled to receive remuneration pursuant to the contract they've entered into with the producers. Authors of film scripts, musical works, and other works that are included in a film and can be separately exploited are entitled to exercise their copyright to such works independently. Under the film regulations and the Sino-Foreign Co-Production Regulation, no organizations or individuals from abroad may independently make films within China, and cooperation between any Chinese entity and any foreign entity in film production inside China is subject to the approval of SARFT on a film-by-film basis, and only Chinese producers with film production licenses or a film production single film license can cooperate with foreign producers in a film production. Approval by SARFT will be evidenced by a co-production permit for a joint production project or an approval certificate for the other 2 forms of co-production. and a co-production permit has an effective term of 2 years. Under the film regulations and the film enterprise qualification provisions, distribution of films in 2 or more provinces, autonomous regions, that's places like Xinjiang, or municipalities directly under the central government, such as Chongqing, require a film distribution license issued by SARFT, and distribution of films within these places may be approved by the local counterpart of SARFT in such region at the provincial level. Film distribution licenses issued by SARFT are subject to inspection every 2 years, and those issued by the local counterparts of this regulator at the provincial level are subject to annual inspection. In practice, film distribution licenses will generally have an effective term of 2 years, and as I mentioned in another context, usually they have to, you have to apply for extension before the expiration of the term. Distribution of foreign films is subject to special approval by SARFT, and current China Film Group Corporation and Huaxia Film Distribution Company are the only 2 enterprises which are licensed to distribute foreign films in China. Film distributors cannot distribute any film that's not received a license for film public screening. Under current regulations, film distributors must distribute films to theatre circuits instead of individual movie theatres. Moving on to the next slide. There are certain relevant considerations in structuring co-production. It's generally up to the parties to decide which mode of co-production they would prefer to adopt, but there are a few issues that they might wish to consider when looking at this. The relevant issues are really intertwined and can't be considered in isolation. The nature, this involves the consideration of whether the investment will be contributed solely by the Chinese and foreign parties, in which case the party should adopt joint production, or solely by the foreign party, in which case they should consider assisted production. Creative elements. If the story is such that there will be no Chinese elements or insufficient Chinese cast to constitute at least 1/3 of the main cast, the parties should either consider revising the story if joint production is the preferred, or adopting assisted production. Division of obligations. Generally, the Chinese party to a joint production will participate heavily across all stages of production, up to promotion and release. And in assisted production, their level of participation and decision-making tends to be lower, and they're not usually involved in the promotion and release of film. Censorship. Regardless of the mode of production, all films made in China must be submitted for censorship review. Rights and release of the film. In a joint production, it's a requirement of the law that the Chinese and foreign parties share profits derived from the film. The parties, however, are allowed to specify in the co-production agreement how the rights and profits will be divided in a straightforward assisted production. However, the foreign party will usually be the owner of the copyright subsisting in the film. Well, turning now to the recent developments, we already heard this very exciting development from Jean Hewitt in terms of the expansion of the number of films which can be released in China, from 20 to 14 if they are technologically advanced films such as widescreen, etc. We also heard that the censorship process will be streamlined and hopefully made more reasonable, quote unquote, from a Western perspective. We've also heard that foreign producers will share 25% of the box office receipts under the new arrangements, up from the current 13%, around about 13%. I'm not going to dwell on this in more detail because we've already heard a very good exposition of the current developments very first-hand from some of the people who were really involved in that from the ground up. Let me turn for a moment to this question of censorship as it exists at the moment. In terms of censorship, the content in films expressly prohibited, there's a whole list which is on this screen at the moment which you can see and which I won't go through in detail. And although these criteria seem vague, all-encompassing, and may severely limit the variety of genres available for shooting, many film producers still manage to find a way to satisfy both censorship and commercial needs. It's often achieved by avoiding issues, even of the slightest controversy, staying completely within the safety zone. Many reluctantly allow substantial removal of sensitive scenes in return for screening in China, and some even create different story endings to suit both the international and the Chinese market. It's interesting that the domestic market has seen the recent film about the Nanjing massacre portrayed in a relatively sympathetic way towards the Japanese, although a lot of aspects of the Cultural Revolution probably still remain off limits for the moment. It'll be interesting to see what the developments are in terms of film content in that kind of area.
And Julia, you have 3 more minutes.
Thank you. I'm turning now to Hong Kong as the gateway to China's film market. One way to avoid the quota system imposed on which China imposes is to use the Closer Economic Partnership Agreement, CEPA, through Hong Kong, which was entered into between Hong Kong and the Chinese government in 2004. And a number of co-produced films have enjoyed massive success in entering into the Chinese cinema under CEPA. Under CEPA, Chinese language films produced by Hong Kong companies are not subject to the import quota set for foreign films, provided that Hong Kong companies own more than 50% of the copyright, contribute at least 50% of the invested budget of the film, and are the leading producer. And the Cantonese versions of such films can be distributed and screened in Guangdong. Hong Kong companies also enjoy special advantages in co-production with the mainland. First, there's no requirement on the proportion of principal creative personnel from Hong Kong. And in addition, a non-mainland focus for stories is allowed. Hong Kong mainland productions in Chinese language are treated as mainland productions after receiving approval. And apart from the advantage of statutory exemption, companies can enjoy the talent, the expertise of personnel from the Hong Kong film industry, and so on. I would also say that structuring films and film arrangements and joint ventures at the Hong Kong level under Hong Kong law may result in considerable advantages from the perspective of Hong Kong's relatively certain legal system and rule of law, which is based on the former British system with an independent court system and fairly recognizable common law rights, which are well protected by the Hong Kong courts and relatively stable business environment. So whether it's through CEPA or through a joint venture, perhaps with a Chinese party, to create a joint venture in Hong Kong, which then subsequently invests into Chinese film, both those routes may offer considerable advantages for a foreign party who is, particularly those who are perhaps first looking at the China market. Okay, well, I think that brings me more or less to the end of my time. I'm very happy to answer more questions on Hong Kong later. And I'm going to pass over now to He Jing, who is an expert in intellectual property law from Beijing, from ZY Partners in Beijing.
Thank you, Julia. Hello, everyone. The next presentation, I will be more focused on the enforcement side of the copyright in China. And as I can think of, many of you on this call are very concerned about what the situation in China, in terms of piracy. Can I really protect my film or my TV program products in China? So what's going to happen, if someone pirated my content and distribute them or display them on the internet? How would that affect my rights in China? So before I really talk about the enforcement landscape, I just want to, say a few words about the general approach of the enforcement. In China, stating it very briefly, it's definitely doable and workable to deal with the piracy through different, legal approaches. In China, the police deals with the piracy cases, and more interestingly, China offers this administrative enforcement system because China is so big, and the police are not really able to do all the grassroots enforcement actions. So the government actually offers this, what we call the cultural marketing enforcement teams at most of the city level locations to deal with the piracy problems. Of course, the situation is not far from being satisfactory, but I just really want you to know that there is a system in the place, that there is a national force dealing with the piracy both on the physical market and also on the online market. Now, in terms of the general landscape, I want to touch on a few things here. I just want you to know that in China right now, the IP disputes is really fast growing for better for worse reasons, but this is part of the signs that the industries and the general public has a much better awareness of the IP rights. What is really interesting to know is that for among all these IP cases, I'm talking about the core cases, 60% are copyright cases. This is just one of the the proof that the copyright is really at the center of the IP focus in China these days. Part of the reason is that we think it's the local content owners are really growing very fast in the past 5 years. Another part, you may be interested to know is that the Chinese court actually are getting much more efficient and much more mature in these days in dealing with IP cases. Part of the reason is that the case docket is really growing, and the government also pushing for more the IP enforcement. The IP judges actually tend to probably among the best trained judges in China. They get a much better education. Actually, a lot of them even had the international education experience. Another interesting is that China has been constantly updating the rules and regulations when it comes to the IP area, because it's really widely regarded as one of the most sophisticated area and also one of the most growing area in China. And this as an example, recently the Supreme Court IP Tribunal sent a delegation of the judges to visit the U.S. They were in Los Angeles, meeting with people in the Hollywood, they're really talking about what are the latest practice, international practice when it comes to deal with the online piracy. So this is just one of the signs that the people are here are really trying to improve the system. Another latest fact is that China is now starting the reform of the copyright law to improve the protection of the copyright, and also the government is now planning to change the criminal code with respect to the IP crimes. And the general trend is that there will be more rules and the ground in place to give more effective and more certain protection for copyright. At the same time, it's worth to know that China is getting more and more litigious, and one of the examples is that the recent cases between Trudeau and Youku. For people that having started to do the transaction in China, you probably know that this is the Trudeau and the Youku are the two largest video file sharing companies in China. It's like YouTube in China, okay? But we have 3 or 4 of them here, and both of them are actually listed company. The copyright cases between them is very interesting. They are still pending. I'm not judging who's right, who's wrong, but just so you know, this is the video sharing companies are actually enforcing the licensed content they have against each other. What part of the reason is that they want to use this to gain this competitive advantages, okay? And it's very interesting to note that China, the copyright industry, are getting much more vocal, and people are really seeing that the contents are really offer a very attractive. The revenue stream offers a very good, interesting models, and in fact, the Chinese government is now pushing for the high growth of what we call the creativity industry or content industries. So more and more financial resources and talents and the business management resources are really putting these industries, and people really seeing this offers very attractive for business. And in terms of the copyright enforcement authorities, they are getting much more proactive. I just have noticed that China has this administrative enforcement, and the local copyright office are getting very proactive even though they're traditionally viewed as a little bit, less strong authorities, but in the last couple of years, they are really stepping up and they manage to use their power and also the social influence and putting a lot of pressure on some major pirates in China. Now, after I said all this, I'm pretty sure a lot of you still have a question, what's really going on? Does it really work? Of course, I think on the ground, it's not really hard to find, piracy DVDs that are being on sale, being offered on the streets. Go to the internet site, you'll find, unlicensed content. Here I gave you an example that was a recent complaint from the CEO of the Huayi Brothers, one of the largest the movie companies in China. They just released a big hit, the Valentine hit, they call Love, right? But the guy shared on the Weibo, the Chinese microblogging, like the Chinese counterpart of Twitter, he basically openly said, hey, the Hollywood movies, they always know pirates before they're launching or after they're launching, and how come our local Chinese-made versions always end up being pirated so severely? Now, I'm not sure whether what he said is exactly true about those Hollywood blockbusters. They are Hollywood blockbusters running to, facing the piracy problem as well. But the kind of complaint is showing that the local, showing two things, okay? At least the local people say, hey, the foreign movies, foreign films are getting more protection, better protection than the local films, okay? And another thing, that you could read out of this is that the local CEOs of the local film companies are getting much more vocal, and actually the piracy issues are becoming something as very, very big in the public dialogues, which is will definitely benefit the enforcement actions, will help the government to take more proactive actions against the piracy. Now, the major problem is that in China right now, the online piracy is very challenging because of the nature of the Internet. The lower amount of damages we're talking about here is more about the court actions. And as I said, 60% court cases, IP cases, are about the corporate cases, but the damages are relatively low. So that's the major problem that the corporate owners are trying to push to improve. Criminal prosecution are getting more and more common, but because of limited police resource and the threshold that's set up in the law, it's still relatively difficult and unpredictable for the producers to secure the timely, responsive criminal prosecution against the pirates and pirates. But the good news is, we are seeing more and more criminal cases on the ground. Now, I want to turn to a little bit more like the background side, actually. Just so you know, in China, the more and more licensed contents from the U.S., from the international side, are becoming available in China. Part of this is because the IT industries are really having the explosive growth in the last few years. And the two companies just mentioned, Trudeau and Youku, are among one of the very popular video sharing companies, and both of them are listed, which means they've got a lot more resources now. Actually, to be able to get listed, they really have to clean themselves up and have very convincing, good self-policing program for themselves. And because of all this efforts, we can see that international companies are getting much more active and having their content available on the Chinese, the video sharing sites, and they are able to get a certain amount of revenue from this. This picture just shows, the Big Bang Theory. It's very popular in China. I think that right now, if you can see it, it has been viewed like 2 million times in China. It's also for free, but the video sharing companies are I think they are able to get the advertisement revenue out of this. Another example is the NBA programs, and there are a lot of sports. They are getting more and more. Sports programs being popular, being offered online in China, out of the cooperation between the foreign content owners and the Chinese websites. Now, the general strategy I would offer here, just to highlight a couple of things. For content owners, I think it's quite important to be responsive in some of your in the enforcement actions. I'm not saying you have the resources to do everything, but just so you know, when you have the good cases, you're able to use like take down notice, send directly to the video sharing sites, or you can for those Paris. The physical Paris market, you should think about doing the complaints to the government through administrative route or even the criminal actions. Now, anti-piracy as part of a business plan. What is interesting is that a lot of public business partners you may start to work with may somehow have infringed your content in the if not yours, maybe some others in the past. Okay, and sometimes, if I can guarantee you, if when you send out some takedown notice to some of the famous and major video sharing sites, and they will do that for you, and then quickly they'll come back to you and say, "Hey, can we work together?" I'm pretty sure that's going to happen. So at that moment, you really need to sit down and think about what's your strategy and how you can really make this work in China. And one of the big factor you may have to think about is that the local partners. And if you are interested to distribute your work online in China, which I'm pretty sure you'll find a lot of very attractive audience and the viewers, and they really even pay for your content. By the way, more and more paid content that's becoming available in China.
And Jean, you have 2
how
minutes.
You can select the local partners? Yes, and you should really working. One of the things, a very important thing that's very important criteria for you to select the local partners. Really take a look what kind of enforcement programs they have, whether they can really help you to secure a relatively a safe area or a safe group of viewers to see your content and to make sure you have the revenue out of it. A word for the industry group. Actually, the people on this call is actually part of the industry group. One of the things that I would always advise are, the smaller companies to do the enforcement work in China is that they must really act in groups. And one smaller company, the kind of attention you can get in China is quite limited. It's very, very important for you to work in groups. And that's how you can really get attention from the governments. At all levels, at the national and local levels. And the diplomatic efforts are very, very important, and you will need to work with the U.S. Department of Commerce and keep pushing for your initiatives, especially on the enforcement side. And there's also potential for you to do the government lobbying, on the policy side, on the action side, and the piracy actions. And it will be really helpful to have a very strong leader in the group and keeping pushing for the agenda for you. Okay, that's my part of presentation. Now I will turn this program to our next speaker, Esther Ho. Thank you.
Hello. Yeah, I'm going to talk about protecting IP and copyright in Hong Kong, in particular in respect of movies. Then Hong Kong has its own comprehensive set of statutory law for protection of IP laws. In addition to these statutory laws, protection is also available under the common law action of passing off. For movies, for protection of movies, the most relevant law will be copyright law. Films are protected under the copyright ordinance, and the first copyright owner is the producer and the principal director. That means unless there's agreement to the contrary or unless there's a copyright assignment. Otherwise, the producer and the principal director will be taken as the copyright owner. The term of protection is 60 years from the end of the calendar year in which the last of these persons die, the principal director, author of the screenplay, author of the dialogue, or the composer of music. Hong Kong now adopts an open qualification system. That means that irrespective of where the author resides, his work is protected in Hong Kong, and no registration is required for copyright protection. Apart from copyright ordinance, the trademark ordinance may also be of relevance, since the name of a movie may be registered as a trademark and protected as a registered trademark. So when you apply to register a trademark, you need to name the goods or the services that you want to protect. So in relation to movies, the most relevant class will be Class 9. You can register your mark in respect of motion picture, pre-recorded DVD, or downloadable motion picture. And you can also register it in respect of entertainment services. And nowadays, it's very common to also exploit the character in popular movies in relation to other merchandises, such as toys, T-shirts, watches, online games. And if you want to get protection in these areas, then you need to also register your mark in respect of these goods or services. It's, however, not practical to register your mark in respect of every kind of goods and services, but that doesn't mean your mark will not be protected, because we still have the common law action for passing off. I can't move the slide. Right, okay. So the passing off action is to protect reputation. If you can prove that your mark or the name of your movie is very reputable and someone is copying the mark and then using it in a way to cause confusion to the public, then you may sue them for passing off. In case of infringement, there are two aspects of taking action: civil action and criminal action. For civil action, the most common thing to do is to send a demand letter to the infringer or to take court action against the infringer to ask for an injunction, delivery up of the infringing items, disclosure, and also legal costs and damages. However, sometimes it's not that easy to trace the identity of the infringer. For example, in case of an online infringement, it's very difficult to find out who uploaded an unauthorized copy of a movie on the Internet. Then in that case, the corporate owner may consider applying for a disclosure order, apply to the court for a disclosure order against, for example, the Internet service provider. Although he is an innocent party, if he is in possession of information of the infringer, the corporate owner may actually apply to the court for a disclosure order against him. But the applicant for the disclosure order must prove that there has been some serious wrongful acts committed, and that the applicant also needs to demonstrate that it is just for the court to grant such order. The court will also consider whether the innocent party is the only practical source of information, and if the innocent party is subject to any duty of confidentiality. On the criminal side, corporate infringement may amount to criminal liability under the corporate ordinance. It's provided that distribution of an infringing copy of a work for the purpose of or in the course of any trade or business amounts to an offense. But even if the activities are not for the purpose of or in the course of any trade or business, if it's to such an extent as to affect prejudicially the corporate owner, that may also give rise to criminal liability. Likewise, trademark infringement may also attract criminal liability. And in Hong Kong, it's required to obtain a license to manufacture optical discs. So if someone manufactures any optical disc, irrespective of whether it contains any infringing materials, if it does not have a license to do so, then that also gives rise to criminal liability. The Hong Kong Customs and Excise Department is responsible for taking criminal sanction against copyright and trademark infringement. And they have done many prosecution before, and the most famous cases is one of them is called the Chen Nai-Ming case. In this case, the customs officer found that the defendant, Mr. Chen, is using BT to upload films onto the Internet. He also sent a message under the nickname Big Crook on the Internet news group together with a BT file to publicize and enable others to download the films. He is convicted, notwithstanding that his activities are not for the purpose of or in the course of any trade, because the court finds that the extent does affect prejudicially the corporate owner. So he is convicted. He appealed to the High Court and the Court of Final Appeal, but he lost in both levels. Another case is the recently very largely publicized case of Mega Upload case. This website, megaupload.com, allows users to download pirated movies and other content, and it is registered to offices in Hong Kong. Last month, the Hong Kong Customs officers, in cooperation with the U.S. Department of Justice, raided various locations in Hong Kong, including hotel suites that cost more than Hong Kong dollars 100,000 per day, and other office premises. And in the course of this action, the customs seized large amounts of digital evidence and uncovered 300 million worth of crime proceeds. So when we are talking about combating online piracy of movies, the customs action actually have some advantages compared to taking civil action, as the customs have more resources, and the customs is going to set up an electronic crime investigation center later this year to formulate strategy and procedures in evidence collection. The customs have also set up a scheme called a Youth Ambassador Scheme together with the IP department. They recruited the local youth uniform organizations and their 200,000 members to form a strong alliance which aims at fighting illegal file sharing activities by using ET software on the internet. And this scheme is supported by corporate work owners of foreign and local movies, TV series, MTV, etc. Turning then to protection of IP rights at trade fairs, actually it depends on whether the trade fair organizer has any complaint procedures. For the coming Hong Kong Filmart, the trade fair organizer is Hong Kong TDC, which actually has a very established complaint procedures. So if you want to complain against an exhibitor who is found to have infringed your IP rights, what you can do is to file a complaint with the fair management officer of the Hong Kong Filmart Fair. And the complaint should include your name, the name of the party being complained of, and proof of IP rights. For copyright, the proof required means you need to provide the name and details of the author of the work you want to protect, the date and place it was made, and also you need to provide an original work or a certified copy of the work. Or you can just produce an affidavit under the copyright ordinance stating the particulars of copyright, and that affidavit will be taken as prima facie evidence of copyright ownership. So after you file the complaint, the legal advisor of the trade fair will then review it and see if it's valid. And if it considers it to be a valid complaint, then the HKTDC fair official will visit the booth being complained of and ask that exhibitor to remove the product in dispute immediately, unless it can put forward evidence that it has the right to deal with such product, in which case it will need to sign an undertaking. But if that exhibitor fails to cooperate, then the HKTDC has the power to ban it from any and all future exhibitions. Okay, so that's the end of my presentation. So I'm now going to pass it to Fanny Chow.
Hi, thanks, Esther. This is Fanny Chow. I'm the commercial specialist at the U.S. Commercial Service in Hong Kong. I'll talk briefly about Filmart and what we are doing at Filmart. This year, Filmart is at its 16th edition. It is one of the most attended film markets in the region and the biggest and most well-established market in Asia. It is a cross-media, cross-industry trade platform in that it entails several thematic zones, including TV world, animation and digital entertainment world, and also the equipment and post-production services. Last year, the show attracted nearly 600 exhibitors from 30 countries and regions, and over 5,000 visitors from 54 countries and regions. And there were about 19 international pavilions at the show, including, of course, China, France, Germany, India, Israel, UK, and the US, of course, just to name a few. Most importantly, it is a springboard to the Chinese market. Last year, there were over 130 Chinese exhibitors at the show, and it definitely is the place for gaining access to the Chinese market. Worth mentioning was that last year we had the first ever U.S. pavilion at Filmart. We give special thanks to IFTA, who had organized the pavilion with close to 30 U.S. exhibitors. I will explain a bit more on the Department of Commerce involvement at Filmart. We have basically 3 programs that work hand in hand to facilitate our U.S. exhibitors at the show. First, we have the MDCP program. This is a program of the U.S. Department of Commerce, and it has, in 2001, it has awarded a grant to IFTA, which will spread over 3 years to help IFTA to establish national pavilions at international shows. And we are into our 2nd year of the program, and another program that goes with it is the Certified Trade Fair program. The Department of Commerce has granted Filmart our endorsement as a show that we will support. Now, what does that mean? This endorsement enables us to pool our regional resources to recruit and bring buyers to the show. For example, last year we had 9 regional buyer delegations with 140 buyers that we recruited from the region. And of course, this year we are continually working on it, and we have about the same number of regional buyer delegations, and hopefully we will exceed last year's buyers number. And also, it's the Pacific Bridge Initiative. We call it PBI in short. This is an agreement between the U.S. Commercial Service Hong Kong and the Hong Kong TDC, the show organizer, which aims to facilitate U.S.-Hong Kong partnership to explore new markets, particularly in Asia and China. It is a program acting on President Obama's National Export Initiative to double U.S. exports in 5 years. Now, with the PBI, Hong Kong TDC has been providing great support to our export promotion efforts. For example, last year, Hong Kong TDC has sponsored a cocktail reception for our first ever U.S. pavilion, and this is just one example of their support. And you can see on the screen, here's a photo of our last year's, our team photo at last year's Filmart. And I'm one of the ladies on the photo. And so if you have not registered as an exhibitor, you may want to do it as soon as possible with IFTA, our office, or Hong Kong TDC to reserve a space. Now, I'm going to turn the program to the last speaker, Mr. Jonathan Wolf and Shiral. Thank you.
Thanks, Fanny. It's been a great presentation over the last hour, so I'll be very brief. The American Pavilion at Filmart, which is in our 2nd year, is already the largest pavilion that IFTA has ever created. And we have pavilions, or have had pavilions, at a total of 6 different venues throughout the world. And this has quickly become the largest. It is the most efficient. It is the best value for those who attend. Right now we have 28 companies on the pavilion. We have room for 3 or 4 more. I know for the IFTA members who are on the phone, there are about 6 or 8 of you that are sort of on the fence. I urge you to move quickly, because in the next 2 or 3 days, when we are out of space, there simply just won't be any more. Our pavilion has a limited and fixed amount. We just think it's tremendous value. We've been a supporter of Filmart for quite some time, and we encourage everyone here who's an exporter to participate in that event. It is just great for staying in touch with the region. And really, in terms of wrapping that up, that's it from us. Sharuk, do you have anything? No? Back to you, Andrea.
Thank you, everyone. This has been very informative, and I would like to now introduce Janice Wingo, who is going to moderate the question and answer session.
Thank you. This is your chance to call in. We have some experts here live. You can talk to them live. Also, our 3 main Presenters Julia Charlton, Esther Ho, and He Jing have all said that anybody who is listening to the audio recording of this presentation may email questions to the presenter and they will get back to them. So at the back of each slide you will see the presenter's email address. Feel free to email them if you have any future questions. Operator, can you tell people how to call in?
Thank you. We would now like to open the lines for any questions. If anyone does have a question, please hit *1 and record your name when prompted. Again, it's *1 to ask a question. One moment to see if we have questions.
I'd just like to remind everybody that this audio recording will be posted to the stopfakes.gov website. It will be under the China webinar, IP webinar series. There are other resources on the webinar series, such as on Chinese copyright law or cases that He Jing has mentioned, or actually other experts, other lawyers have discussed those cases. While we're waiting, I have a hypothetical question for He Jing.
Sure.
Lawyer He, often in-house attorneys here in the United States will send out C&D letters directly to infringers in China. I know that you've suggested sending them in Chinese. Do you have any other suggestions for sending out C&D letters so that they can be used later in civil litigation?
Well, that's a very good question, very practical. I think in terms of sending the C&D letters, really it needs some thinking. Okay, if we just send the usual U.S. practice, it may not be as effective as you may expect. First of all, sending the C&D letter will serve as just a takedown notice under the Chinese law, which will be the basis for the lawsuit in the future in terms of against the website operator. But to be able to use that as evidence, that would be a little bit complicated. If you're really serious thinking about doing legal action and using this as evidence, we will, advise our client to find a way to have the letter notarized and authenticated in, under the Chinese procedure requirements. So to authenticate that, normally people do, through the notary public and then authenticated by the PRC consular service in the United States. But that self, will appear daunting to many people. So as an alternative, many people have been doing in the copyright or the trademark or patent cases is that they actually have the local counsel send it out on the local law firms, the letterhead, and then have that letter just notarized on the local area, like in Beijing or Shanghai, and those kind of evidence will be acceptable, completely by the Chinese court. And we also think, sending a letter under both the company name and the local law firm's name may, make the websites, your warning, be more aware of the facts, and they feel like, the threat is probably more imminent and much more closer. A letter, English language and sending from the U.S., sometimes appears quite a bit remote to some of these Chinese infringers or some of the sites operators. But if someone sends that letter, from the local area or from the same city, that may get the attention in a more effective way.
Thank you.
Thank you. We do have a question from Katie Irwin. Your line is open.
Hi there. This is Katie Irwin from Myriad Pictures. I had a couple of questions. I'll try to keep them brief. You guys had discussed when we were talking about the new regulations, the increase, hopefully, in transparency in the way that several of the systems in China are currently working. But we focus mostly on theatrical distribution, and something that I've actually been asked that I would also be interested in obtaining is a list of titles that are broadcast by CCTV6, the state free TV station, and whether or not that's something that anyone on the line could help us, if the members that deal with China could help us obtain.
Can the commercial service help them?
Yes. So you would like to get a copy of the CCTV list of programs?
I mean, basically a list of the foreign films that are being broadcast on CCTV. I mean, very briefly, the reason why is that there are several companies that you know, kind of come in and out of the market as middle people that are looking at titles that are not necessarily theatrical, so they're looking to submit them into CCTV6 for approval for those rights. And we found in at least one situation that we've had someone that did not necessarily have those rights actually manage to get distribution on CCTV6 illegally.
Oh, got it. Okay. So you're talking about which time frame?
I mean, is it possible to get like a monthly update on what their, you know, upcoming broadcasts are, or anything in the last couple of years? Something. I mean, ideally we'd have, you know, a list every year going back at least a couple of years. But at this point, we've got nothing. So anything that could give us an insight would be helpful.
Right. I'm here working in the Hong Kong office, but I can pass your request to my Beijing colleague. I have my contact information on one of the slides. My name is Fanny Chow. I'm based in Hong Kong. If you can kindly send me the request, then I can pass the request to our colleague in Beijing.
And this is Susan Cleary from IFTA. Can you just copy me on that? Bill Anderson in our research department has some sources of monitoring. Although television broadcasts, there isn't generally a reliable third party that is monitoring, you know, all television broadcasts. I'm not sure if this one broadcaster they have monitoring reports for it, but Bill will be able to point you if there is a private service that provides this. Although we don't know of any publicly available information for free that provides this in English at this point. Maybe we just didn't run across them yet.
This is Katie again from Myriad. I certainly looked and offer maybe a couple of suggestions, you know, based on what I know about the way it works here. There are two ways to do this, okay? And definitely, the information is public in terms of the Chinese, but the English version probably not available on the CCTV6 website. But if you really want to do this on a systematic level, because you really want to check the licensing status, right, for some of the program broadcast by CCTV6, maybe a probably workable solution is that it would be better at some point to directly engage with CCTV6, right? Offer them as like assistance or to help them to figure out, you know, who has indeed the right authorization, and that will probably give you a much more sustained way to work on this. So you could, you know, approach the CCTV6 under the name of the industry group. I think that's probably a more feasible way.
We actually have a more centralized service that confirms distribution rights, legitimate distribution rights, and actually names the distributors. We do a certification program via an MOU we have with the NCAC. So, Katie, you're probably familiar with the service. I know Myriad uses our certificate.
Yeah, it's me that you guys talk to all the time. And I actually, Hejing, I can read some Chinese. I used to live in China, and I've used the CCTV6 website, but there have been some instances where I don't, where I found it to not be as reliable and not be as clear in providing the information that we sales agents would be looking for. So yeah, I will certainly continue to ask CCTV6, and if anyone else, you know, here on the call in different groups that we're all involved in have relationships there, if that's something that we could kind of all bring up to them to try to push them to maybe provide a list like that to IFTA that IFTA could then share with its umbrella companies.
Let us look into that, and let us look into, because it's centralized in the Copyright Office in China and Beijing, you know, we probably don't want to reach past the government and try to, you know, set up, you know, some formal process of rights verification. that's outside the government process we've already agreed to with the major studios to participate in. But let us look, because, as I said, there might be some independent monitoring that Bill knows of. We did get some independent monitoring reports regarding box office in China, third-party verifiable ones, and the same service, the same consulting firm that's based in Hong Kong, I forget the name of the company, but they also could be doing the same thing for television. So let me just check that out. Copy me on your email, and we'll see if we can track something down for you, Katie.
That would be great. Thanks, guys.
You had a second question?
I did. It was also really quickly, and this was possibly too specific for this forum, but if there's any discussions going on about other TV, because up until now it's discounting theatrical and discounting the new media rights, like with Youku and Tudou and Baidu's streaming service and all of that, other potential TV options, because I've had a lot of people asking me about things like pay TV rights for set-top boxes and things like that, and you know, just looking for some insight into the general movement of the market at this point, since it's moving so quickly, and we don't have the insight as sales agents working on this side, and not sure if any of you are at any point monitoring the different ways that the market is changing, other than the main things like the IVOD, IPTV wave. Does that make any sense?
Hi, this is Maura Kawai, and I just can add that what I've heard is that, I'm sorry I can't address the pay TV rights question, but what I have heard is that television in China, there actually is money available, and they are spending on programming and content, and it's actually in some ways easier than film. As a market.
All true, Maura, all true. And that's because the licensing in television is regional, and many of the deals are direct with the broadcaster, so you're eliminating, you know, the other rights that would be licensing, and so the expectation is limited to television, and it's a little bit easier to negotiate and to track. And of course, the rating system is a little bit different for a television product, and the importation system is different. So.
Yeah, as far it's Katie from Myriad again. As far as I know, though, CCTV6 right now is the only legitimate distribution outlet for foreign films for TV proper. But I guess it's just that I don't know who would be a good resource to ask about when people start approaching me about other rights, and whether or not there are other legitimate distribution outlets that are cropping up in the Chinese market outside of the CCTV6 forum.
Okay. Well, I'll also follow up with our offices in China and see if I can get an answer.
And
so I'll send that to you.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Okay, sure.
I think we can expect that putting the television broadcasters aside as distributors, we will be seeing, as a result of this concluded agreement, we will be seeing new players in the national distribution market for imported films. And those, of course, many of you know companies that are Chinese enterprises that will be able to now apply for licenses for distribution, to be able to mount nationwide distribution. So we're going to see, we most likely will see, if all goes well, an explosion of various options for distribution, and also all rights distributors popping up directly that will be able to handle the theatrical. And this is for films other than rev share. So tracking these new distributors is actually an important exercise, because we're actually going to have to be tracking new distributors that are engaging in national theatrical distribution of imported films on a outside the quota system, to be able to measure the success of the agreement once it's implemented.
Okay, that's great. Yeah, that's great to know. Thank you.
So I'm sure our trade representative's office will be tracking that, and certainly IFTA and I'm sure the MPAA will be tracking that in the future.
Operator, do we have anybody else in line?
Yes, we have one more person. It's Ken Silverman. Your line is open.
Thank you. This has been fascinating. I have to say I've been involved in India for the last 15 years, and I'm quite new to China, but I got an education already, just got back from 8 days in Taiwan. But my question is this. I understand the limitations in the past, which are now opening up in terms of the volume of content, motion pictures allowed to come into mainland China. I am wondering how that is mirrored, or what are the parameters relative to volume of television programming or motion pictures for television as opposed to theatrical exhibition.
Julia? Julia, are you on the line?
Yes, can you hear me? Hello, can you hear me?
Yes,
I can.
Yeah. Hi. Yeah, I'm sorry, I'm not familiar with the volume which would be used in television, which is dealt with separately. What I was talking about was the licensing for film, which of course can be shown subsequently and separately later on TV networks, which are mainly Chinese-controlled ones. But I don't know any figures which you're asking for in terms of relative size. Do the industry people know that?
Oh, unfortunately, we don't have that figure either, but we can definitely try to dig something out.
Yeah, my question relates to if the number was 20 foreign films a year for theatrical, is there a comparable number for television? It's X number of hours or any kind of parameters that limit the amount of foreign television?
No, they're actually, the fact is that the reason that there is a limit on the number of imported theatrical films has to do with the fact that they are licensed on those 20 that get in the quota, now the new 14 enhanced, are the only films that are able to be imported and distributed theatrically on a revenue share basis, meaning they can take a portion of the box office. Of course, we know that television, and that's what the quota really is. The quota isn't on imported films being distributed because, of course, we see 14 to 20 films come in outside the quota system, and their compensation is based on other factors, but not based on box office revenue. So, of course, we know licensing is not, for television, is not based on box office. It's a negotiated fee for a number of runs or a split of the gross receipts of the television broadcast. So or the number of subscribers it's going to if it's pay cable. So I think that if you can get it censored, you can get it you can get it licensed. There is no official quota, because the quota that we are talking about and for motion pictures has to do with theatrical distribution of imported films based on revenue share of box office gross.
Thank you. That was perfectly clear. I get it. Thank you so much.
Great.
Thank you. I am showing no further questions.
I just wanted to remind all the listeners on the audio recording that Jing He, Julia Charlton, and Esther Ho have also said they'd be willing to answer questions on their respective topics. Feel free to email them if you have any questions. Also, feel free to contact us at the International Trade Administration. We have commercial service officers based in China and Hong Kong who can assist U.S. companies as they export abroad.
And then, of course, this is Sue and Sharuk here at IFTA offices. If you're an IFTA member, you know how to contact us and the support we can offer you directly through your trade association.
Andrea?
All right, this is Andrea. Thank you, everyone. It's early for some and late for others. It's been very informative. I've been taking copious notes, and I look forward to working with all of you in the very near future, and also to meet some of you at the Hong Kong Filmart. And I'd like to thank Janice and Sharuk for being key partners in organizing and arranging this webinar, and of course all the speakers for the dedication and the research and time that you've put into the presentations. Thank you very much.
Thanks to the members and all of the people that are interested in this great topic and our friends on the Commerce Department team. We really appreciate your support, and you do important work for the independent sector, and we appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you all for participating in today's conference. You may disconnect your line and have a great day or a great evening.
Thank you.